My name is Alara Quinn. And last night, I watched my husband's perfect little lie shatter under the flicker of a cheap motel lamp. The air inside was stale, heavy with perfume and sweat, and the hum of the neon sign outside bled red light through the thin curtains. He sat there with his shirt half unbuttoned, leaning far too close to a woman I'd never seen before, his hand on her thigh like it belonged there. My heart didn't race. My breathing stayed steady. This wasn't showkit, was confirmation. The truth I had suspected for months had finally unfolded right in front of me. His hands were exactly where they shouldn't be, and her lipstick smeared across his skin like an unmissable warning sign. The scene would have gutted most wives, but I didn't feel the need to cry or shout. I had already burned through those emotions months ago. All that remained was something sharper, something colder. I stood there, still as a shadow, watching him laugh, watching her touch his face as if she had any claim to him. The sound of their voices barely registered. All I heard was the pounding silence in my head. He didn't notice me in the doorway, didn't sense the shift in the air. I let the seconds stretch, savoring the moment before he realized he wasn't as clever as he thought. And then, in a voice calm enough to freeze his blood, I said his name. That one word sliced through the room like a blade. His head snapped toward me, eyes widening, the blood draining from his face. She pulled back instantly, her confidence crumbling under the weight of the unspoken truth hanging between us. I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. My presence was enough to unravel them. His lips parted, searching for words that refused to come. Her eyes darted between us, the way prey looks for an exit when the predator steps into the clearing. I let the silence choke them for a moment longer, watching the false ease melt from his posture. My stillness was calculated. This wasn't the time for anger. Anger was too messy. This was the time for precision. Inside, I could feel the years of quiet observation. The months of gathering proof. The countless nights lying awake beside a man I knew was lying to my all of it sharpening into a single point. He thought this was the night I would break? He thought I'd fall apart right there in that cheap room. But I didn't break. I didn't even bend. Instead, I smiled slow, deliberate, and terrifying enough to make him swallow hard. That smile wasn't for him. It was for me, because in that moment, standing there with his betrayal painted across his skin, I realized something he didn't. This was not the beginning of my pain, it was the beginning of his. Every moment he thought he had fooled me, I had been preparing. Every lie he told had been another brick in the trap I was building. He had handed me the tools for his own downfall without even knowing it, and now, he was standing in the center of my carefully laid stage. I had been preparing for this night, far longer than he could imagine. This was not a spontaneous reaction, not the heat of the moment, it was the culmination of a plan so intricate, so deliberate, that he wouldn't see the full scope of it until it was far too late. The fear in his eyes was just the first crack. Soon, that crack would spread, and everything he valued, everything he thought he controlled, would crumble, and I would be there, watching, just as I was now, silent, steady, and smiling. For 11 years, I poured every ounce of myself into our marriage, believing we were building something solid, something lasting. I carried the weight of our dreams, while Adrian chipped away at them quietly, like a termite eating through the foundation of a house. It began with small things, late meetings that stretched past midnight, weekend work trips that required no explanation, and phone calls he always took outside or in the driveway. I told myself it was stress from work, not betrayal. I wanted to believe the man I had married still existed beneath the distance that was growing between us, but suspicion is like a splinter, it digs deeper the more you try to ignore it. My instincts whispered that something was wrong, and eventually, I stopped dismissing them. The evidence came in fragments: hotel bookings under his name that didn't match his supposed travel schedule, receipts for jewelry I never saw, and a perfume scent lingering faintly on his shirts that wasn't mine. Every piece was small on its own, but together, they painted a picture too clear to ignore. My trust was no longer bruised, it was breaking apart. Still, I stayed silent. There is a kind of power in pretending you don't know the truth, in letting the other person think they're winning the game. I became an actress in my own life, smiling when I needed to, nodding when he spoke, pretending to believe the lies he wrapped in casual explanations. But inside, I was collecting ammunition, each deceit carefully catalogued and stored away for the day I would use it. I didn't want just an argument. I wanted an ending he would never recover from. The whispered conversations were the worst. His voice took on a softness I hadn't heard in years, But it wasn't for MIT, was for her. I'd hear him in the other room, speaking low, his tone dripping with a kind of attention I had once believed was mine alone. He thought he was clever, lowering his voice, walking outside, speaking in code. What he didn't realize was that I had learned to read between the silences. I didn't need to hear every word to understand exactly what was happening. As the months passed, my love for him turned into something unrecognizable. Affection soured into calculation, trust curdled into strategy. I started to look at him differently, as a husband, but as a target. Every lie he told me became another step toward his own undoing. I let him think he was in control. I let him think I was oblivious. It was easier that way. It gave me time to decide exactly how I would dismantle the life he had taken for granted, and then came the final confirmation, the night I caught him red-handed, the hotel room, the woman, the expression on his face when he realized he was cornered. It was a moment, years in the making, the proof that every suspicion had been real. But standing there, watching his world tremble, I knew something else. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't a mistake or a lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate, calculated deception that had lasted for years. He had built an entire life in the shadows, believing I would never see it. That belief would be his downfall. He had underestimated me, assuming I would react with tears or rage. But I had been preparing far too long for that. I didn't just want him to know I had found out. I wanted him to feel the weight of every lie, every betrayal, crushing down on him until there was nothing left. And when that moment came, it wouldn't be loud. It would be quiet, surgical, irreversible. I didn't want a messy confrontation that would burn hot and fade quickly. I wanted something colder, something that would last. Destruction, when done right, is not an explosion, it's a quiet dismantling. Piece by piece, until the target doesn't even realize they're standing in ruins. I already knew every password he used, every bank account he kept, every hidden drawer where he thought secrets were safe. Years of trust had given me a blueprint of his entire life. And now, I was using that blueprint not to protect him, but to dismantle him. Quietly, methodically, I began pulling at the threads. The first step was securing my safety net. Our joint savings, the account we had built together for emergencies, became my personal war chest. I transferred it in small amounts, spread across weeks, so the movement wouldn't trigger suspicion. By the time I was done, there was nothing left for him to touch. If he noticed the balance shrinking, he didn't mention it. Maybe he thought I was spending it. Maybe he assumed it was just bills. Either way, he didn't question me because questioning me would mean paying attention. And he never paid attention unless it served him. Next, I moved on to his reputation. He valued it more than anything, more than money, more than love. It was his armor. I knew exactly where to strike. I reached out to his largest business partners, each one carefully chosen. Using encrypted emails and anonymous numbers, I sent them fragments of concern, hinting at his gambling debts and reckless spending. I never gave them everything, just enough to make them uneasy, enough to plant seeds of doubt. People don't need the whole truth to start turning away. They just need to feel like something's wrong. While that poison took root, I targeted his personal life. Social media was my playground. I created subtle, believable accounts that followed him, interacted with his posts, then quietly dropped hints and comments and private messages that didn't quite make sense unless you were looking closely. I made sure those hints reached the right eyes: his colleagues, his friends, his family. I didn't accuse, I didn't expose. I just made them curious enough to start asking questions. And curiosity is the kind of spark that can burn down entire relationships. He was too wrapped up in his own arrogance to notice. He still carried himself with that same smug confidence, still believed the world bent in his favor. When he looked at me, he saw the woman he thought would never fight back. He didn't see the strategist I had become. The one who had been quietly moving pieces into place, like a chess master waiting for checkmate. That blindness was my greatest advantage because, if he had even suspected, he might have tried to stop me. The beauty of my plan was in its pace. It was slow enough to be invisible, deliberate enough to be inevitable. Like a crack in glass, it started small and perceptible from a distance, but with each passing day, it spread further. Every business call he made, every meeting he attended, every interaction he had was now touched by doubt, suspicion, and mistrust. He didn't see it, but the people around him did. And once people start doubting you, it's almost impossible to make them stop. By the time he realized something was wrong, it would be far too late. I wasn't going to simply expose him and walk away, that would be too easy. No, I wanted him to feel it creeping up on him, the walls slowly closing in, the air growing thinner. I wanted him to fight to keep what he had, only to watch it crumble, no matter what he did. The destruction had begun, and there was no turning back. He walked into the private dining room with that self-assured grin I had learned to despise. The table was set for two soft candlelight, fine china, the illusion of romance. He believed this was an anniversary celebration, a chance to bask in my admiration. I let him think it for those few steps, watching the confidence in his stride, the arrogance in the way he loosened his tie. Then his eyes fell on the black folder placed neatly at his seat. His brow furrowed, confusion replacing his smugness. That moment of hesitation was the first small fracture in the wall he thought protected him. He sat down slowly, his gaze flickering between me and the folder. I said nothing, letting the silence push him toward it. He opened it, and the air seemed to shift as his eyes scanned the contents: photographs of him in the motel, detailed receipts for every affair, account transfers showing the slow bleed of our finances into my name, and at the bottom, the divorce papers, signed and ready. His jaw tightened. I could see the calculations in his head, the desperate attempt to understand how much I knew, and how I could possibly know it. Before he could speak, the doors opened. The sound of footsteps echoed through the room, and two of his most valuable clients entered, each holding the printed evidence I had sent them days before. They didn't greet him, they didn't smile. They simply laid the documents on the table and took their seats as silent witnesses. He blinked, his composure slipping further with every passing second. His posture straightened, his hands gripping the edges of the table. He was trying to regain control, but control was no longer his to take. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw her, his mistress, perched at the bar, her dress too bright for the dim setting, her face pale. She was not here by accident. She was watching, not with defiance, but with the same wide-eyed stillness as prey that suddenly realizes the hunter is near. I caught the flicker of recognition in his eyes, the realization that she was not the ally he thought she was. She glanced at me once, just enough to confirm his suspicion without saying a word. The air in the room thickened, pressing down on him. His breathing became shallow, his shoulders tense. I didn't need to raise my voice or explain myself. The evidence spoke louder than any accusation I could make. Every piece of paper, every photo, every signature was a nail in the coffin of the life he had built on lies. He looked at me as if I had turned into a stranger. But I hadn't changed. I had simply stopped pretending to be the woman he thought I was. He tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. His clients remained silent, their eyes cold, their presence heavier than any confrontation. The mistress lowered her gaze, avoiding his desperate attempts to read her expression. In that moment, he was completely alone. The walls of the room seemed to close in, the soft music in the background suddenly sounding like a cruel mockery of romance. Every exit was blocked not physically, but by the truth pressing in from all sides. And then I smiled. Not out of joy, but out of finality. He understood, in that split second, that this was not just a betrayal exposed, it was a verdict delivered. The folder was not a threat, it was a sentence. Everything he valued, his reputation, his business, his relationships, was already gone. All that remained was for him to sit there and realize that there was no way to fight back. The trap had closed, and he was never getting out. His lips parted, some half-formed excuse dangling in the air, but I didn't give him the chance to finish. I slid another envelope across the table, smaller than the first but far deadlier. Inside were the transfer records, proof that for the past 9 months, I had been quietly moving his company shares into a shell corporation under my control. He stared at the pages, eyes darting over the numbers, looking for some mistake, some loophole that didn't exist. "You can't," he began, but the words felt weak even to him. He knew I could, and worse, he knew I already had. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence hang heavy between us. He was no longer just cornered, he was gutted. That business was his pride, his fortress. The one thing he believed untouchable. He had spent years building it, and I had dismantled it piece by piece without him ever noticing. I didn't have to raise my voice or gloat. The papers spoke for themselves. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about erasing him from the empire he thought he ruled, leaving him with nothing but the memory of what he'd lost. His hands trembled as he flipped through the documents again, as if rereading them would somehow change the outcome. That's when I delivered the next cut. I gestured toward the bar, And his mistress, his precious escape from our marriage, walked toward us. Her heels clicked against the floor, slow and deliberate, like the ticking of a clock, counting down the last seconds of his world. She sat beside me, not him, placing her hand gently on the table between us. The confusion in his eyes was almost pitiful, but not enough to soften my resolve. "Why?" he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. She smiled faintly, but it wasn't the smile he knew. It was sharper, colder. She told him the truth that she'd been working for me since the day they met. Every late-night confession, every text, every intimate moment had been orchestrated. Every accidental photo she'd sent was planned. He thought he was being clever, hiding his sins from me. In reality, every secret he told her was being funneled straight back to me, neatly packaged and time-stamped. His arrogance had built the perfect trap for himself. His face drained of color, and for a moment, I thought he might actually collapse. The betrayal in his eyes wasn't about my actions, it was about hers. She had been his confidant, his accomplice, the one person he thought was on his side. Now, she was calmly dismantling that illusion in front of him. I didn't need to say much. The look on his face told me he was replaying every word he'd ever spoken to her, realizing that every whisper had been a confession directly into my waiting hands. The room felt impossibly still, like the world had paused to watch him unravel. His clients sat frozen, absorbing every revelation. The mistress, my accomplice, pushed her chair back and stood beside me. Her role in this was done. The evidence was complete, the humiliation irreversible. There would be no rebuilding from this, no scrambling to save face. He had lost the business, the affair, the allies, and the illusion of control all in the same breath. The walls around him weren't just closing in, they had already collapsed. I gathered the folders, tucking them neatly into my bag, and stood. My voice was calm when I finally spoke. "You wanted a life without me. Now you have it, but it wasn't freedom I was giving him, it was exile. Everything he had, everything he was, had been stripped away, and all that remained was the echo of a man who once thought he could outplay me." As I walked out, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. His silence was enough to tell me he finally understood. This was the day his empire died. By the time the first light crept through my curtains, the storm I had unleashed was complete. His accounts were frozen, his credit lines revoked, and every business contact he had once relied on now treated his name like a stain. They couldn't scrub away fast enough. The fallout wasn't loud, it was quiet, precise, surgical. That's what made it so devastating. No second chances, no backroom deals to save him. The world he had built for himself had vanished in a single night, leaving him with nothing but the awareness that I had been the one to pull every string. I heard later that he had packed a single suitcase, just the essentials, and slipped out before anyone could see him. No farewell dinners, no final speeches, no attempt to fight back. He simply disappeared. Some said he left the city. Others claimed he went overseas. I didn't care enough to confirm. His absence wasn't my concern. What mattered was the emptiness he left behind, not just in business, but in the narrative he had crafted about himself. The man who once thought he was untouchable had been erased without so much as a public goodbye. The house was quiet without him, but not in the way it had been before. Back then, the silence had felt heavy, suffocating, a reminder of how far apart we were even when we lived under the same roof. Now, it felt open, like the air itself had been cleared of something toxic. Every room carried a different kind of stillness. Not the stillness of waiting, but of arrival. This was my home now, fully mine, without the shadow of his presence stretching into every corner. I could breathe again. Of course, people talked, they always do, in hushed tones over coffee, in passing whispers at parties. They called me cold, ruthless, calculated. They told each other stories of my merciless execution of the plan, embellishing it until it became almost myth. I let them. I knew the truth, that my actions weren't born out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Survival has a way of stripping you down to your core. And my core had learned that kindness doesn't save you when someone's determined to destroy you. Freedom is a strange thing when you've been caged for years. It doesn't rush in all at once, it seeps in slowly, like sunlight through a half-closed curtain. At first, it feels unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, because you've grown used to the weight of your chains. But then, little by little, you realize you can move without asking permission. You can breathe without fear. You can speak without calculating the cost. That's when you start to taste it's a sharp, intoxicating flavor of a life that belongs entirely to you. In the weeks that followed, I began rebuilding not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I made changes to the house, tore down walls he had insisted on keeping, opened spaces he had once closed off. Every choice was deliberate, a small rebellion against the years I had lived under his control. I didn't replace him with someone else, I didn't fill the emptiness with noise. I filled it with myself, my voice, my decisions, my presence. The home no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like sanctuary, and in that sanctuary, I thrived. The whispers eventually faded, replaced by new scandals and fresher gossip. People moved on, but I didn't need them to forget. I only needed them to remember one thing: no one cages me twice. The woman they thought was broken had walked out of the fire untouched, carrying the ashes of the man who tried to burn her. I wasn't just free, I was unshakable. And once you've felt that kind of freedom, you'll burn the whole world before you give it up again. Some will tell you revenge is a waste of time, a poison you swallow, hoping the other person will die. They speak from the comfort of never having been gutted from the inside out by someone they trusted. They don't know what it feels like to have your dignity stripped away piece by piece, while the person responsible walks free, smiling. For me, revenge wasn't about lingering in the past, it was about reclaiming the parts of myself he had tried to erase. It wasn't bitterness that drove me, it was clarity, the understanding that some debts can't be forgiven, only collected. As I stood there, watching the remnants of his life crumble, I felt no need to gloat. I didn't need his apology or his understanding. I didn't even want him to know how much planning had gone into his fall. The beauty of it was that my silence spoke louder than any insult. He would live every day knowing that I had dismantled everything he valued, and he couldn't stop me. That knowledge would haunt him far longer than any shouted words could have. His shame would be my lasting reminder. Revenge, I learned, isn't about restoring balance. Life rarely works like that. There's no cosmic scale that tips perfectly in your favor after you've been wronged. No, revenge is about creating a consequence so heavy that the person responsible feels the full gravity of their actions. It's about ensuring they understand that they made a fatal mistake in choosing you as their victim. They don't get to walk away unscathed. They carry the scar of their own choices for the rest of their life, and that is the true justice. Some will label you heartless for it. They'll say you should take the high road, rise above, let karma do the work. But karma moves slowly, and I wasn't interested in waiting for the universe to catch up. I took the low road, the direct one, and I walked it with purpose. The satisfaction didn't come from cruelty. It came from the knowledge that I had finally taken back control, that I had turned the tables so completely he didn't even see the final blow coming until it was too late. When I think of him now, I don't feel rage. There's no heat left in it. Just a cool, steady certainty that I did what needed to be done. He will never forget my face, my silence, my refusal to break. And he will never again mistake me for someone he can control. That's the beauty of a perfectly executed revenge, leaves no need for lingering anger. The victory is complete, and you can move forward without carrying their weight anymore. They remain trapped in their loss while you step into your freedom. Freedom tastes sweeter when you've earned it in battle. Mine didn't come from walking away quietly. It came from dismantling the very foundation he stood on. Every brick I pulled from his life was a brick I placed into my own new beginning. I didn't need to rebuild him. I only needed to rebuild myself. And when you rebuild yourself stronger, sharper, and untouchable, there is nothing left for them to take from you. They can only watch from the shadows, wishing they had never lit the match that set you on fire. And so I let him disappear, carrying nothing but his shame and the echo of my silence. I didn't chase him. I didn't check where he went. I didn't care. He was no longer a part of my story, just a cautionary footnote for anyone foolish enough to believe they can betray me without consequence. Revenge wasn't about evening the score, it was about ending the game entirely. And I had won, completely, irrevocably, and without ever looking back. That's the only closure I needed. That's the final note.